A lion roars right outside our tent at night. Well, 2017 really was our lion safari. The roars vibrated through our tent night after night, as Rob recorded by the light of the hurricane lamp. However, we did start on a more peaceful note, staying in the rest house in Arusha Park. From the dining veranda, we could see dawn breaking over a distant Mount Kilimanjaro. Even here, in this park on the slopes of Mount Meru, we noticed signs of the drought which is affecting the whole of East Africa at this time. Mount Meru, at 15,000 feet, is just some 4,000 feet lower than Kilimanjaro. A buffalo skull hangs in the dining veranda and proves a very useful roosting place for a pair of crag martins. This devoted couple just fly in and out during the day to rest and preen. Here they are quite safe from local predators. Our first trip out took us to the village of Ngari Nanyuki, just outside the park. Well, it used to be a small village. It's now turning into more of a small town. Tomatoes are the main crop and chief source of employment. They can be grown outdoors all year round here. When the bus is full up inside, there's only one thing to do. Nothing like a bit of exercise. Pickers, women or children, gather the plum tomatoes from low, unsupported bushes and bring them in buckets on their heads to the waiting lorries. Makes a colourful procession. I have to admire them carrying these heavy loads. They tip the tomatoes into the crates, and the men come along and arrange them tidily. We wanted to buy a couple of crates, so we left our driver Hamisi to negotiate. Herds of cattle being taken to water passed us on the track. These animals are lucky in that there are plenty of streams from Mount Meru in this area. Nonetheless, the dust created by the drought conditions is very obvious.
Good. Okay, Mary? I went through.
Hamisi completed his negotiations, and we got 2 crates of tomatoes, including the crates, for £10 each. Watching all the activity, quite unconcerned, was this Gabar goshawk, a rare sighting. The crates are too heavy for one man to carry. We estimate there must be about 30 kilos at least each. So we had tomatoes with everything for a while, but many were given away to friends and family. While still at the rest house, we were able to spend an afternoon with Feroz, Sarmina and family of Sunny Safaris.
Now it's underground.
Sarmina brought with her a delicious lunch of prawns and fish from the coast and her special dal curry. After lunch, we all took a short walk to a second bungalow. The second bungalow is newer than the rest house, which dates from colonial times. However, we did notice that this newer edifice had to have some supporting buttresses put to it because it was actually built rather near to the edge of a rather steep slope. That's the hot water system, fueled by tree trunks. If you overdo it, water gushes out of the steam escape pipe in a sort of boiling hot geyser. We know, we've stayed there before. More acrobats in trees, the park's famous black and white colobus monkeys. A baby practices climbing skills, while the mother enjoys the early morning sun. The baby already has the impressive long white fluffy tail, unique to this species. When the males give their territorial calls, it resounds over the park. And a close-up of a blue monkey, another forest-dwelling monkey. There is a remarkable range of colours in the thick fur, but never exactly blue. So we moved on to Tarangire Park and proper camping in a Mbweha campsite next to a sand river. Feroz and Sarmina kindly loaned us a freezer and generator. They said we'd need it because the weather was so hot and dry. And they were right. The small freezer with generator had its own tent a little way away from the main camp. The campfire is necessary for cooking, hot water, and some protection from animals. The Sand River was completely dry this time, but on it there was lots of timber brought down by previous floods, which was handy for the firewood. Tarangire held huge herds of elephants this time. The river provides a permanent water source. Last year the park was green. This year the ground vegetation is very parched. What was a pool last year has now turned into a lovely elephant mud bath. They really enjoy it, and the mud also acts as a sunscreen. However, 4 days later, this pool too was dry and useless for the elephants. Once we'd left Tarangire, we saw very few elephants at all. In drought conditions, they're wise enough to head off for areas where they know there is permanent water. The elephants were not aggressive, but they did occasionally come rather close. The matriarch wants to be sure we don't pose a threat. We're off on the rather long drive to Tarangire's Silale Swamp. It's a place we rarely manage to get to. Either the tracks are too wet or there are too many tsetse flies. But the drought means there's very few tetses this year, which is something of a relief. And on the way we encounter honeymooning lions. They take no notice of us, just enjoy the morning sun. Tarangire has many termite mounds thrown up in the distinctive red-brown earth. And on them you can regularly find these colourful red and yellow barbets. They're busy digging out the termites to eat, which is a bit sad for the termites after all that hard work. Cattle egrets are attracted to buffalo. They know they will find insects alongside the herd. And the buffalo find water in the vast expanses of Silale Swamp. And on the track alongside Silale Swamp, a lioness. She is one of 3 we saw stalking a reed buck which was alone near the water. She is concentrating on her task and oblivious to us. In fact, she's going to use our vehicle as cover. Hamisi, our driver, takes a photo opportunity. But in the end, the hunt failed. The reedbuck caught sight of one of the lionesses and ran off before they could ambush it. As the heat of the day increases, elephants make their way to water, plodding majestically past us. There were good numbers of young elephants to be seen, which is encouraging. The various groups all come together at the river, with very little friction between them. But back at camp, there was some friction going on with some unwelcome visitors, bees. The ongoing drought meant that the bees were desperate for moisture to take back to their nest to keep their young alive. This is our shower. We had to wait until dark, when the bees dispersed, before we dared use it. As for the cooking area, well, it was a real magnet, a honeypot you might say, for the bees. At first they were not aggressive, but eventually they began landing on us, settling on our skin to take moisture from us, and stinging in the process. So in the end the bees won. We decided we'd better move a day early. At the time I said bees are more trouble than lions, but then I didn't know what was to come. So we settled into the peace of Bagayo campsite in Lake Manyara. Here, with the lake on our doorstep, we knew we'd be safe from the bees. Swifts and swallows dash across the sunrise as we settle into a peaceful camp life once more. We put our tent in our usual spot underneath an acacia for shade, though the ongoing drought meant there was very little leaf cover and no ground vegetation to speak of this year. So no weavers making their nests of grass. Still, the first night we were visited by a genet. We know from past experience that 2 or 3 live in this area. They're beautiful creatures, looking like elongated cats, and they hunt for any scraps they can find around camp. We could relax in our chairs and film easily. But the other end of the night wasn't nearly as relaxing. This was the scene at 6 o'clock in the morning, just 25 metres from the campfire. We had heard buffalo in the night, but hadn't realised that 2 male lions had actually killed a buffalo in camp. Unaware of what had happened, at 5:30 Rob said to me, "It's coffee time. Julius has overslept. I'll go and wake him up." Well, he's like that. So he unzipped the tent and strode out about 5 metres, noticing 2 pairs of eyes in torchlight. Then Hamisi shouted, "Lions in camp, Rob." So he came back quickly, without any coffee. Shortly after, Hamisi was able to get into the car, which he always keeps beside the crew tent, and he drove to our tent to rescue us. To place the location of the kill in context, in the foreground is the mess tent and the store tent with the campfire. Just beyond the campfire, that dark hump, that is the buffalo kill. During the day, the lions retreated nearby to rest in the shade. But they returned each night to feast on their kill, and we were able to do some more filming. From the car, that is. I'd never before appreciated just what hard work it must be, breaking into a big body, using just teeth. time, we wondered if there were any more lions around, but it proved to be just these two males, possibly brothers, living and hunting together. And they came back to eat for the next 3 nights, until eventually the buffalo started to smell pretty horrible, and they lost interest in it. One morning, a lion was still feeding when it got light, so Rob began to film from the mess tent, but angry tail waving indicated we'd better retreat. So for the next 3 nights, in between feasting on the buffalo, the lions stretched their legs and roared around our tents at night. No one got much sleep. So in Manyara, Julius the cook came on game drives with us. We couldn't leave him alone in camp. This was supposed to be a simple shopping expedition out into the village, not a game drive at all. But we just came upon a lioness with 3 cubs, right beside the track at the edge of the forest. They looked like very tiny cubs. She'd probably gone off alone to give birth. The males have been known to kill young cubs. A very gentle action with her mouth there. Away from lions at last, we found thousands of birds in the wetlands by the hippo pool. Julius was very impressed by this display. There's terns and egrets flying, pelicans, whistling duck in the foreground. There's so many species gathered here. The presence of a raptor, such as fish eagle or a harrier, put many of the birds to flight. Spoonbills and egrets, with wildebeest and the Rift Valley escarpment in the background. This wetland area was nowhere near as extensive last year, and in this drought year it's certainly proving invaluable. African spoonbills sieve the water for small fish, shrimps, and other invertebrates. Whistling duck are calling while a squarko heron hunts. A pretty Hottentot teal. Never seen those outside Arusha Park before. White-faced whistling duck are well named, and their plumage looks beautiful as they catch the sunlight. An African jacana, whose huge feet give it the other name of lily trotter. It's tossing the water hyacinth around, looking for shrimps underneath the leaves. A long-toed lapwing. Some years we don't see a single one, but this time there were actually flocks of them here. Glossy ibis. In all we counted 34 different species of water birds in this area. Buffalo plough through the marsh, followed as ever by their faithful cattle egrets. Purple gallinule, again with some huge feet. We've never actually seen one in Tanzania before, let alone filmed one. The sunlight shows it off to perfection. Yellow-billed storks and pelicans. Both species do breed at Manyara, but only when conditions are right, not regularly. But the numbers of pelican here lead us to believe that this could be one of the years. Whistling duck and others in flight, a really impressive sight and sound. Egrets and spoonbills, perched on the top of a bush, have trouble keeping their balance in the wind. Finally, we left our campsite with the noisy roaring and the smell of decaying buffalo for a night at the Manyara Bandas. This was in preparation for the long drive to Ndutu next day. We were due to take a new route through Engelin. You can't use this track if it's been raining at all, but in this drought year we were quite confident. Maasai settlements are scattered throughout the highlands, and even here the ground looks dry and dusty. It is normally an area of higher rainfall. on the way we saw these Temminck's coursers. They're nice birds in themselves, much rarer than the usual double-banded courser. But what really caught our attention was the way that these three birds, all males, kept stopping to puff their chests out in between running and feeding, their usual activity. Obviously part of a breeding display ritual, but none of us had ever seen anything like it before. It really looked very funny. Must take a lot of energy too. At Ndutu we were able to negotiate a campsite. This is one area where you can't actually book in advance, but we got the same campsite as last year, number 1 in fact. It has actually got quite an impressive lake view, though that's not really what we go for. Much of the lake floor has turned to dust, and dust was to be the overriding problem in Ndutu. Our tent, last year there was effectively a lawn in front of it, not so this year. But we still had small birds, like this blue-capped cordon bleu, seeking food among the dry vegetation. Our first game drive was to a waterhole in the big marsh, where we were sure we'd find lots of animals drinking. Well, we saw elephant, wildebeest and zebra in the distance, but for some reason they weren't coming down to drink. Those lions again. This male had been feeding on a wildebeest kill just beyond that elephant skull. And now it's time for him to drink. There was also a lioness here, so it was not surprising the migration gave the pool a wide berth. This wasn't what we'd had in mind when we'd said there'd be sure to be animals drinking. The migration was in fact pretty scattered this year due to the drought. No rain in any one area to attract large numbers. He's heading straight towards us, which comes as no surprise on this, our lion safari. Some drivers spend days trying to find lions to show their clients, but we just seem to attract them this year. Well, at least we did see birds drinking. There's 2 species of sand grouse here. The larger are yellow-necked, and the smaller, chestnut-bellied with a sort of semicircle on their chests. They give a strange gobbling call. Last year was so wet, no sandgrass came to drink. They didn't need to. But this year there was a succession of flocks, hundreds at a time. This marshy area was also home to black crakes. Their red legs and eye and bright yellow bill contrast with their sombre plumage. Wildebeest and zebra wander the valley floor, seeking water wherever they can find some. This small pool is rapidly turning into just a mud patch. This is January. The main calving month is February, when we hope there will be some rain to provide fresh grass for them. Dust rises from the valley floor as we think about the effect of it on our cameras and our lungs, and take the decision once again to leave a day early. So we move on to our camp in Kirawira, beside the river Grumeti. When we arrived, it was no surprise to find a male lion lying where I'm sitting now. He did politely get up and move away. He knew we'd got the permit. The shower ritual. Here we have an open-air shower, watched only by the hippo in the large pool opposite, and the crocodiles too, of course. At breakfast on our first morning here, Julius reported seeing eyes in the river. We assumed hippo at first, but torches revealed 4 lions crossing the Grumeti, which was at a low ebb. They proceeded to surround the camp as if for an ambush, so we had to get in the vehicle and drive them away. The hippo keeps an eye on us from his deep pool. Upstream was a large pod of hippos resting in filthy sludge. This one has a tide line on his face. The smell was pretty awful too. Hamisi assured us that hippos really like their water as foul as this. We left the park for a day to go and visit a fishing village on the edge of Lake Victoria. Egrets and marabou storks wander among the people, quite unafraid.
Just to go to Africa.
We wanted to buy some fish and ended up purchasing some large tilapia. They were scaled and prepared for us, with our cook looking on.
Jana kuna jamaa wangu wa Waterback ameniambia kwamba tuende sokoni.
Then the fish were washed at the shore of the lake. Women do their washing here too, and a water seller fills his containers. Then we head off to find some ice to pack our fish in. It's just soft, flaky ice, but it's enough to keep the fish until we can get it back to our small freezer.
When you reach home, you say, okay, where the ugali? Where ugali?
Back through the village of Lamadi. Some more clothes washings taking place in a swamp this time. Although the village is so near to the lake, it seems there's no piped water available. Back into the park. The wildebeest here, near the Ndabaka gate, are not part of the migration, but are resident animals. And as we arrive within 150 metres of our camp, oh look, there's another lion. She's covered in flies, as she's just dragged a fresh wildebeest kill into the shade of a bush. She's giving herself a good clean now. And what is more, she's not alone. She has 4 quite small cubs with her, and they are doing their best to tuck into the carcass too. The lioness has opened up the softer underbelly for them. That's quite a large family to feed. She may be a bit hard pressed when they grow larger. At the moment they still look cute and cuddly though, although in fact they were arguing quite aggressively with each other at times. In the early morning we find the male, probably the one who was sitting in our campsite when we arrived. He makes his presence known. This has has become a regular feature of our safari nights. And here in Kirawira, there was also weird noises from hippo, accompanied by a morning thrush. Soon it was time to move on, back into the heart of Serengeti. This, our last camp, was called Cerro Extra. The officials kindly allowed us to change from the booked camp of Kuru because there was more shade here. We did make the unwelcome discovery that there was a rubbish dump in the Sand River near the camp. It was obvious previous camps had been using it on a regular basis. We said to ourselves that if it rains, the river is going to fill up and carry the rubbish to waterholes downstream. Some of it's rusty, obviously been there for a long time. On our first game drive, jackals, looking as jolly as ever, approached the vehicle. Then suddenly, a lion emerged from bushes and strolled onto the track. And proceeded to drink right in front of us, and followed, incredibly, by yet another one. A safari vehicle drew up behind us, the driver delighted to have such a close view of lions for his clients. Apparently no one had seen lions that day so far. All the drivers were seeking them. Hamisi told him we were happy looking at birds. Another game drive took us to the Simba Koppies, named after the large lion pride which lives in this area. Here we found part of the zebra migration. The land here is parched with the drought, as it was everywhere. Normally the grass is high, and there's widowbirds and widers everywhere. And we soon had another lion sighting. The zebra were keeping a wary eye on this very muddy female, who was probably just seeking shade. Any small waterhole attracts the excited herd. Zebra stallions are very noisy animals. Lines of wildebeest, just a part of the big migration, can be seen in the distance. Buffalo rest quietly, aloof from the general excitement. Meanwhile, back at camp, Julius is hard at work.
So is that the mincemeat you've got there, Julius?
Yeah, it's a mincemeat for the packing.
Yes, yep. And the other one
It's a soup,
is soup, yep. What sort of soup have we got?
tomato soup.
Tomato soup, onion soup, yep. Lovely.
A mini crisis arose 2 days before the end of the safari when the freezer stopped working.
Is there any cokes or...
Hamisi managed to obtain some ice from a lodge, and we set about putting our meat, fish from Lake Victoria, and cold drinks in cooler boxes.
Just make sure that goes on.
Wait.
This
one. Oh, sorry.
No, this is okay.
And on to the next crisis. Storm clouds are gathering. Looks like we're going to get our first rain in 5 weeks. At least we had time to prepare, getting in washing, lowering tent flaps and so on. Well, we had missed rain, but this was a bit much. The temperature in the tent dropped by 10 degrees abruptly. And afterwards the little dry sand river was in full flood, taking all the litter with it, just as we'd forecast. The park authorities really do not keep a check on their campsites. On our final day, driving back through the Serengeti, we had the good fortune to find a cheetah family, mother and 3 cubs, right beside the track. The cubs, though very young, were very adventurous. One of them even left the family and jumped up onto the bonnet of our vehicle. He left a lot of muddy footprints as a souvenir. The family then proceeded to walk ahead of us, eventually drinking from a puddle. And this silhouette of the mother cheetah watching yet another cheetah family only about 250 metres away brings our safari to a close. This really was our most dramatic safari ever. Driven out of campsites by bees and dust, but lions couldn't move us. Perhaps we'll come back and meet them again.